Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So here I am showing you again the outside of the Aunt Shirley dollhouse before I did any updates. So now I can share with you the process of me making my changes. So a total of 3 windows were missing and one of them was a circular one. I started by adding the wallpaper to the entire wall covering the window. And when the wallpaper was dry, I trimmed off the excess on the inside. And then I installed the new window with the trim on the outside. And now I'm back on the inside adding the trim. And I'm really tickled at how it turned out, and I'm especially amused that the stain I had matched what was already in the house. So everything looks very uniform. Now here are the replacement square windows on the 3rd floor. I think that turned out nice. I always love peeking through the windows of the dollhouse from the outside. And I'm just kind of moving the camera around so you can kind of see it from different angles. And there's the staircase. So let me show you what I did on the other side of the attic. So dolls, I must admit, for this room, I did kind of have to piecemeal the wallpaper because of the slants, the slopes, and the inside of the dormer. And I also had to come up with a creative way to level out the surface of the wall inside the dormer before I started. Parts of the wall inside the dormer were not lined up, so they weren't even. So I ended up using some little custom cuts of foam board to level out the walls before I started to wallpaper. And it was really convenient because it was the perfect thickness and really easy to cut. And if I didn't cut it perfectly, it was easy to trim with my craft knife. And you can see me here doing my precision measurements to make sure everything fits properly. And I'm really just taking the time to show you dolls these type of things because with a dollhouse, just like with a real house, everything is not always square and perfect. But that's okay. It's still a good, strong, solid house with good bones. It just needs a few adjustments. And I think that's why I really love doing renovations on older homes because it requires you to be more creative and innovative to make things work. There's a different type of satisfaction that comes along with creatively coming up with a solution to something that was once a problem. And from this angle, you can see me adding a piece there to fill in that gap at the base of the window opening. So I really want to work on that area to create sort of like a little ledge or a lip where I can put maybe some books or a plant or a vase of flowers in there. But let me allow that to dry. So as I mentioned, I did piecemeal the paper and you can see my papering job is not perfect, but I do have a remedy for that. Always keep in mind, dolls, that baseboards, wood strips, and beams are your friend. And I'm really grateful that this is an attic space. So I feel like wooden beams or exposed wood would be very natural in this space. And dolls, always remember, if you don't have official approved dollhouse baseboards and coving, you can also use thin wood strips or square wooden dowels. And in some instances, I've also been known to use extra long coffee stir sticks. I just want to encourage you, dolls, to use what you have and have fun with this. Unless your dollhouse is going to be entered into a contest where it's going to be judged by precision, accuracy, and perfection, relax and allow your time with your dollhouse to be a source of joy, not stress. I think that added a lot of dimension to the room and did a great job camouflaging my rough cuts. So while that was drying, I went on to work on the dormer from the outside of the house, and this is what it looked like before I started. So it had a frame around it and it was really dark. So while I was setting up my camera so I could get good footage of everything, I knocked over the camera stand and the camera and broke the port. And although it was shocking and unsettling, I calmly gathered all the pieces together and now held my camera in my hand and focused back on the window. And after removing the dark trim, I realized there were some other pieces that really needed to come off in order for my new window to fit properly. And at this point, I removed so much wood that I can see my foam board from the other side. Now, at this point, I realized it was fitting a little bit better, but the true culprit hindering the new window installation was that dark trim on the hood of the dormer. So I began to work on it a little bit and pull on it, and I realized it was really actually very easy to remove because the wood was thin and the glue was kind of dried out. And you can actually see from this angle that the additional wood that was hindering me was actually used as a camouflage as well. Now with that additional trim removed, my window fit in pretty well. It's pretty level. I do need to add a little bit, but you can see from this angle the areas he was trying to camouflage. But overall, I'm happy with the way it looks, and all I need to do is make it level so there are no gaps. So at this point, I'm feeling really good about that window, so let me work on this porch. Now, I originally put the porch back together and I felt really good about it until I realized I had lined up the spindles wrong. And this is really a pure example of how sometimes when you're too close to something you really can't see. You need to step back and observe it from a distance so you can see the inconsistencies. When I realized my error, I quickly changed it to make the post on the top porch match the post on the bottom porch. And I also added additional shims next to the house to give it some added strength and stability, because I definitely don't want any of the dowels falling off the porches. Now let's get back to this window. Now, although the window fits in there really nicely, there are some gaps around it that I need to address. And you can clearly see here, there's a lot of space around the edges. So let me go ahead and fix that before I break the porch again. I found this really nice piece of wood that's actually the piece of the trim for around doors inside the house, but it's a really good thickness and it's almost the perfect size for what I need under the window. So I trimmed off the edges of it, sanded a little bit, and stained it, and it fit in there really perfect and look very similar to what's already around the window. And from this view, it looks like it's always been there. And after I allowed that to dry, I went on to try it. Now it is a little bit more snug, but not like I would like it to be. And I did have to take out some of my foam board. So I reinforced those areas with the little wooden dowel sticks, but I felt like there still needed to be something else to tighten up that opening. So I added a small piece of coffee stir stick to the bottom, right on top of that new piece that I just added. So to distract myself and allow that to dry, I turned the dollhouse around to work on the other side. And as I held on to turn it around to the other side, a part of the roof broke off. Repairing the roof was not something I anticipated, but I do have to go ahead and fix it. It's got these big giant nails in it that are definitely kind of dangerous. So I'm going to remove them and add glue to reattach it. Now you can really see that under edge of where I wallpapered that wall, and I really cut it short, but no worries, I'm going to take care of that with another solution. But right now, I'm adding an unnecessary amount of the Weld bond glue to that edge where the roof needs to be reattached, because I want to make sure that I don't ever have to repair this again. Now I've already removed the nails from the broken part, and I'm just lining it up so that I can lay it in place properly so that it can dry securely. And after I lined it up and set it in place, I did hold it with gentle pressure, trying to wait for the glue to catch. And then I ended up adding a few pieces of painter's tape to hold it in place. That was probably not the best idea, but it's what I did. Now just checking on the outside of the house over there where I fixed the roof, you can see that the break disrupted the trim, so I'll work on that later after everything is solid. But now I'm really focused on working on completing the inside of that dormer and installing the window. And here's a quick glance at that beam and how nicely it dried and how good the window looks from the inside. So I'm really happy with how this room is really shaping up. And please excuse the view of my junky work table. Now, turning my attention back to the room, I really need to make a solid decision on how I want to finish the floors. But I used up all of the wood sheets that I got from the estate sale. At one point, I considered using the parquet floor pieces, but there's not enough to complete the job. So in the meantime, I went back to work on the dormer, or the third floor window on the outside, and I did trim off some of the excess foam core that was in the corner because I don't want it to hinder my installation of the new window. And I just want to zoom in here a little bit so you see how I had to clean out those corners and make sure everything was clear before I began to try to install the window. And dolls, I do realize this is a lot of back and forth, but there are a lot of little things you have to consider when you're doing things like this. Now you can see from this angle that it's a gap. It doesn't fit in there. So not only do I need to fill in the gaps to make sure there's no draft, I also have to make sure that the window sits in their level. So I did have a few spare pieces from that veneer that I did the floor with. So I used a couple pieces of that for the sides and a piece of coffee stir stick to make the window sill level. And I really like the way it finishes things off, and it's going to make the fit really nice and snug. And here's my window with the glue added and the stamp from Houseworks that says 1979. And yes, 79 was a great year. And you see now the window is all installed, and I think it really looks great and adds a lot of character and visual interest and really complements the original design. And I think ultimately that's what home renovations should be about. And here we are back on the other side, which is the inside, and that's what the window frame looks like all installed. I have added beams around that area. And here's a quick flashback as to what it looked like before the window was installed. Now, I had an idea about adding an architectural element to the inside of the dormer. Now, these are some lovely decorative elements that were given to me by one of my precious dolls. Her name is Becky Christensen, and she has an adorable eBay store that's called The Happy Little Home. And she makes all kinds of beautiful things, but she sent me these a while back to use in my miniature creations. She makes very unique pieces, and she sent me several of them in a previous video, along with lots of other goodies. And I will leave a link in the description. So I'm going through these pieces, trying to choose a piece that will be like an architectural element for the apex inside the dormer that complements the one that I added in the other room of the attic. So I started the process by adding a thin coat of creamy linen paint to tone down the yellow cast from the original material. Now I only did one thin coat because I just wanted the creamy color to be the predominant shade, so that when I add the other layers of color to create dimension, it will kind of look like old plaster. Now, by the time the paint was dry, I went on to add my alcohol and acrylic paint wash. And I use alcohol instead of water because the alcohol evaporates more quickly. And I use this solution to add time to my pieces because it mimics aging and the look of stain. To me, it really looks nice on things that are highly detailed or have really intricate designs in them. Now, when it comes to things like this, you can work on it as little or as much as you want. Just make sure you're conscious and deliberate. But be careful with this because sometimes it's so much fun you can overdo it. And speaking of overdoing things, here I am with my little tried and true tube of Rub and Buff. I really love the antique gold. Now, as you can see, my little tube looks a little bit mangled because I had lost the lid and the opening got dry, so I had to puncture the tube to get some out. So make sure you don't waste your product by returning your lids. This is definitely a moment of do as I say and not as I do. So after I punctured the tube, I was able to get a little out on my fingers, and I just rubbed it across my piece to just hit the highlight and bring out more of the design. So this is definitely something that you can overdo. So make sure you're sparing in your application. So doing these 3 different treatments or applications to the piece really make it stand out and look special. So here's a quick review or overview of what I've done so far. I mainly was focused on this attic space, which was the last part of the house to be done. That's the window. I do need to put trim around it, but you can see where I've added the beams and I have trimmed out the dormer. Now this is the other side where I added that octagon window. So I do need to do railings for the steps to complete that. I'm really excited about how quickly I was able to do these little updates. Now the only thing left to do is make a decision about the attic floor and decide what color to paint the house. Plus, I'm really excited about moving the dolls in and getting the dress shop up and running again. I sure do appreciate you, dolls, and I really enjoy creating this content for you. And if you're new to the channel, always look for me on Mondays and Wednesdays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm looking forward to seeing you soon on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.